I waited in the hall for some news. Robert was with me. He had insisted on being there, saying that I would be less nervous with some company. It wasn't working. It had been hectic since we came from the mission. Shortly after I had shot the murder bot that had crept behind Robert on the field, Maria Hill had come with Agent Langan and the rest of the team, and they had helped get Agent Eversley into the Quinjet. After that, Agent Rezica had flown us out of there as fast as the engines allowed him. When I boarded the Quinjet and I saw Leslie, I froze. She was there, a little banged up, but she was alive and well. She was safe. I had been pushed out of the way so they could carry Agent Eversley onto the ship, and when Leslie didn't look our way, I started to grow anxious. I approached her and saw that she had been knocked out. There was a small fight, Robert had explained. She got pushed against a machine. Hit her head pretty hard. She'll be fine, Miss Hill had said, putting a hand on my shoulder reassuringly. Now I was pacing the hallway of the hospital, while Robert followed me with his gaze, sitting on one of the benches. I hated hospitals. I felt like they were places where only bad things happened. I didn't like to come when some of Leslie's friends had a baby. I even hated places with white walls as they reminded me of hospitals too much. So, he started. I noticed you go by Atwood now. I stopped my pacing, and a nurse had to swerve to avoid me. He really wants to go there? Yeah, I said. Why? I narrowed my eyes a little. Isn't it obvious? I said. He rose his brows surprised and looked down a little embarrassed. I sighed and shook my head. I didn't mean to snap at him, but I really wanted to leave the past there, in the past. I sat down next to him and gathered my thoughts. I didn't want to have anything to do with him, I explained. He looked at me. I noticed, but I looked forward, avoiding his eyes. During the trial, they kept calling me Miss Walker, I continued. I hated it. It made me sick. I shook my head a little and looked down. So I changed it. Why Atwood? He pried. I smiled a little bit. My mother, I said. Her last name was Atwood. I stopped for a second, debating whether or not to open up to him. She died, I ended up saying. I frowned. I wasn't going to cry, even if it hurt me. I had cried enough. I looked at him and chuckled. It's dumb. I never knew her. I don't know why I care. He looked at me with pity and, for the first time, I didn't mind it. He seemed to be comprehensive. I liked that. She died when she had me, so I guess it's the only thing I have of her, I finished. He nodded slightly and opened his mouth to answer, but a doctor came out of the room Leslie was in. You can come in now, the doctor said. I jumped up and hurried inside, leaving Robert in the hall. Leslie was on one of the beds. She had her arms crossed over her chest and looked positively bored. I ran to her side and hugged her. She tensed up and gasped because of the pain. I'm sorry, I said, for everything. She relaxed and hugged me back. What are you sorry for? She asked. If I hadn't had the drive, she pulled me back gently. If you hadn't had the drive, none of this would have happened, she agreed. But other things could have. We don't know the future. I frowned a little. I'm okay, she said, holding my hand. That's the only thing that matters. I nodded. I'm glad you're okay, I said, squishing her hand a little, to which she smiled. We're all glad, said Nick Fury as he came into the room. Mr. Fury? I acknowledged him, a little surprised. What are you doing here?
I came to debrief Miss Harrington,
he said. He looked at Leslie.
If you don't mind, I just want to ask you a few questions.
Of course, she said, serious. He nodded and looked at me.
And I was hoping you would join us again, Miss Atwood.
I tilted my head. We had gotten Leslie back. What else did he want?
The Avengers are going to Sokovia, he said. Ultron's there.
He looked for a beat.
All of it.
I understood. They're going to try to kill him, I said.
We would appreciate your help, he continued. You can manage yourself well on the field. We need as much help as we can get.
I nodded, but Leslie grabbed my arm. No way, she said sternly. You are not going to go fight that thing. Les, I have to help, I retorted. She prepared herself to argue, but I interrupted her. It's the right thing to do. I'm one of the reasons Ultron's out there. She still seemed to have doubts. I don't want him to hurt any more people, I said. She looked down. I didn't think Ultron had hurt her much. She seemed fine. She must have been scared, though, so I could understand why she wouldn't be too happy about me going. But she also had to understand that it was my duty. Mr. Stark, Dr. Banner, and I had been reckless in creating Ultron. Now it was up to us to stop him before he did something drastic. Like kidnapping Leslie. I already knew he had no limits. I couldn't imagine what he wanted to do in Sokovia, but I guessed it wasn't anything good, and considering he had gotten a hold of some vibranium, if he built himself a new body with that, he could be unstoppable. I had to help. I had to do something to atone. She let go of my arm and nodded. Just, she said. Be careful. She looked up at me. Please. I nodded eagerly and hugged her again. I left the room, leaving her with Mr. Fury, and found Robert still sitting on one of those benches of the hall.
How is she?
He asked, standing up as soon as he saw me. She's fine, I said, smiling. Thanks. He nodded. I mean it, I said. Thanks for helping me get her back, and for keeping an eye on me before all of this. Thanks. He grinned.
Don't worry about it.
The whole stalking thing was a bit overboard, but you did save our lives, I added, chuckling.
I'm sorry about that, he said. I don't regret saving you, obviously, but I should have been upfront about my intentions from the beginning. I'm sorry. Atwood, pup.
Agent Langan called us from the end of the hall. He was with Agent Eversley, who had just gotten out of the medical after being checked for concussions. They gestured us to follow and started to walk away. We ran and caught up with them.
We're leaving as soon as the boss gets back on the helicarrier, Agent Langan informed us. We're going to Sokovia.
Robert frowned.
What's Ultron doing in Sokovia anyways? Nothing good, pup, Agent Langan said.
You coming, Atwood? Agent Eversley asked, looking over his shoulder my way.
Yeah, I said.
Yes, sir, he corrected me. There it was again. The hierarchy. It was like adults needed constant reminders that they were older than we were. I smirked. Yes, sir, I repeated. He nodded and Agent Langan patted him on the back.
Look at you, all S.O.,
he said, and they started to joke around while Robert and I followed close behind. What the hell is a S.O.? I muttered.
Supervising officer, Robert said.
He looked my way and gestured towards Agent Langan with his head.
He's mine. I'm guessing they're thinking of making Agent Eversley yours.
I looked at Agent Eversley. He was nice. I could see him as a teacher, making sure new agents followed the right path. But I didn't know if one of those agents should be me. That's if I decide to stay, I remarked. He chuckled.
Of course you are staying,
he said, too sure of himself. I grinned in his direction, waiting for him to explain himself.
We make too good of a team to split up.
I laughed in an almost guttural way, and our SOs darted their heads toward us for a second. I looked down, trying to look serious, but I had to hold a smirk back. Yeah, I said to Robert. You're right. We make a good team.